The reflection in the mirror is supposed to be your ally. Mine was showing me a woman in a power suit, ready to conquer the world. But it was also showing me a ghost. Over my shoulder, on my husband's laptop screen, was my entire soul sold out in a single email. It was my plan, my work. And then I saw the subject line. Project Nightingale. He called me his nightingale, his songbird, the one who sang beautiful ideas only he could hear. And he had just used my most intimate nickname as the code name for my own execution. Have you ever been betrayed by the one person who was supposed to be your biggest fan? If you believe revenge is a dish best served in the boardroom, hit that subscribe button. This is where we stop getting mad and start getting everything. Comment, checkmate, down below if you're staying to see how I took back my work, my life, and his corner office. But to understand how I ended up there, frozen in front of that mirror, we have to go back. 6 months. Back when our life wasn't just good, it was glossy magazine perfect. My husband, Mark, and I were the golden couple of Omnicore Technologies. We were the ambitious, perfectly synced marketing duo that everyone either admired or envied. We finished each other's sentences in brainstorming sessions and celebrated every win, big or small, with cheap champagne drunk straight from the bottle in our downtown Denver apartment. Our life was a carefully constructed high-rise of mutual goals, late nights fueled by coffee and the shared, intoxicating dream of climbing the corporate ladder together. I loved him, but more than that, I trusted him. I trusted our partnership. The first crack in that foundation appeared on a Tuesday. It was small, almost invisible, and its name was Jessica, his ex-wife. She was transferred to our department, a refugee from a corporate downsizing, and Mark insisted we take her under our wing. She was all wide, doe eyes and soft-spoken gratitude, constantly praising my work in a way that felt less like admiration and more like she was studying me. Mark was immediately protective. "She's been through a lot, Chloe," he'd say, his hand on my back. "We need to help her get back on her feet." And I, being the supportive wife, agreed. I shared my resources, my contacts, my time. The first real warning sign was a week later, in a team meeting. I pitched a tagline that had the whole room buzzing. It was sharp, clever mine. That afternoon, I overheard Mark talking to our director. Yeah, Chloe and I were bouncing ideas around, and we came up with... He repeated my tagline, framing it as a product of our perfect partnership. A tiny, cold spike of annoyance hit me, but I pushed it down. We're a team, I told myself. A win for him is a win for me. But the we started feeling more and more like he and she. Bah, the late nights Mark and I used to spend working together were now spent with him on the phone, mentoring Jessica through some manufactured crisis. Date nights were postponed. Inside jokes were met with blank stares. It felt like, in these small, insidious moments, my husband was choosing his ex's emotional needs over the health of our marriage. But I told myself I was being jealous, that I was the one creating a problem where none existed. After all, he was my husband. He wouldn't betray me. He wouldn't sleep with his ex, not even emotionally. That's what I believed. That was my first and biggest mistake. That first mistake was a gateway drug. It led to a second, then a third, until I was living in a fog of denial, willingly ignoring the blaring sirens in my own gut. The next 6 months were a master class in psychological warfare, so subtle and expertly played that I didn't even know I was a soldier on their battlefield. They were the architects of deceit, and I was living inside the beautiful, gilded cage they were building around me, bar by invisible bar. It all started with what I now call Jessica's strategic incompetence. She was brilliant. I knew that from her resume, but at the office, she played the part of a helpless fawn. It was always small things at first. "Oh, Chloe, I'm so sorry. I can't get this formula to work in Excel. You're just so much better at this stuff than I am. I'd spend 20 minutes fixing a simple lookup, and she'd shower me with enough gratitude to make a saint blush. Mark would watch from his desk, a proud smile on his face. "See, you're such a natural leader, babe," he'd say later, making me feel like my annoyance was unjustified. But her incompetence began to escalate. One Thursday night, just hours before a major client deliverable was due, the shared drive suddenly corrupted. Specifically, the folder containing all of Jessica's market analysis, the cornerstone of the project, was gone. She burst into tears at her desk, a full-blown meltdown. "I don't know what happened," she cried, looking at me with those wide, terrified eyes. "I must have done something wrong. I'm going to get fired." My evening plans vanished. My dinner grew cold on my desk. While Mark took Jessica to the break room to calm her down, I spent the next 5 hours, fueled by stale coffee and pure adrenaline, rebuilding her entire analysis from scratch using raw data. I finished at 2 a.m., my eyes burning, and sent the final report. The next morning, the client was thrilled. Our director praised the report's incredible depth and insight in a company-wide email. He praised Mark as the project lead. He praised Jessica for her resilience under pressure. My name wasn't mentioned. When I tried to talk to Mark about it that night, my voice tight with exhaustion and resentment, he cut me off before I could even start. He had that look on his face, the one that always made my heart melt. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. "I saw this today and it made me think of you," he said, his voice a low whisper as he fastened it around my wrist. "You're the strong one, Chloe. You're the engine that makes this whole thing run. I'd be lost without you. We'd be lost without you." And just like that, the anger dissolved into a puddle of guilt. That was his other weapon, the love bombing. Whenever I got too close to the truth, whenever my frustration started to bubble to the surface, he would smother it with affection. He'd plan elaborate date nights, leave love notes on my laptop, tell me I was the most brilliant woman he'd ever met. He made me feel so loved, so cherished, that my own legitimate feelings started to seem petty and ungrateful. How could I be mad at this perfect man who adored me so much? The gaslighting was the final piece of their architecture. A coworker, Sarah from accounting, pulled me aside by the coffee machine one afternoon. "Hey, is everything okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "It's just, Mark and Jessica seem to be attached at the hip lately. They're always grabbing lunch, staying late together. It's starting to look a little weird." A cold dread washed over me because it wasn't gossip. It was an observation of my reality. That night, I tried to bring it up to Mark as gently as I could. His reaction was instant and icy. "Seriously, Chloe, you're listening to office gossip now. I thought you were better than that." He shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. "Jessica is my employee and my friend's ex-wife. I'm mentoring her. That's it. The fact that you'd let some catty gossip poison your mind about me, honestly, it's insulting." I felt my face flush with shame. He was right. I was being ridiculous, jealous, insecure. He made me feel like I was the one with the problem, that my intuition was a character flaw. He was so convincing that I found myself apologizing to him. It was a pattern. Each time I questioned, I was made to feel crazy. Every time I saw a red flag, he'd convince me it was green. This was how my husband chose his ex over and over again, not in some grand, dramatic affair, but in 1,000 tiny, daily betrayals of my trust and my sanity. He wasn't just having an emotional affair, he was actively making me believe I was losing my mind for noticing it. He was isolating me, not just from my coworkers, but from my own judgment. Jessica played her part perfectly. The more time she spent with Mark, the more in awe of me she acted. "Mark told me about how you saved that client report," she said one day, her voice full of reverence. "You're just incredible. I wish I had half your talent. It was a master stroke of manipulation. How can you hate someone who worships you? How can you suspect a woman who constantly tells you you're her hero?" So I started to believe their narrative, that I was the strong, brilliant, slightly jealous wife, that Mark was the supportive, noble husband, and that Jessica was the fragile, harmless mentee. I lived inside this story, this fiction they co-authored, because the truth was too terrifying to contemplate that I was being played by the two people I was closest to at work. One was stealing my ideas while the other was stealing my husband, and they were doing it right in front of my face, smiling the entire time. I learned to ignore the late-night texts to his phone from Jay. I learned to accept his excuses for why he and Jessica needed to have strategy dinners alone. I told myself this was what a modern, trusting relationship looked like. And then, the email landed in everyone's inbox. The announcement for the new director of marketing position. The job both Mark and I had been working towards our entire careers. It was the ultimate prize. That night, Mark held me in his arms. "This is it, babe," he whispered into my hair. "This is for us. We're going to get this, together." And I, lost in the fog, nestled closer and believed him. I believed we were still a team. I had no idea the game was already rigged, and I was the only one who didn't know the rules. I was about to enter the fight of my life with a partner who was secretly the commander of the opposing army. The game was on. The announcement of the new director position sent a shockwave through the entire department. It was all anyone could talk about: who had the inside track, whose project numbers were up, who was positioning themselves for the big prize. For Mark and me, it was the Super Bowl of our careers, the culmination of everything we'd been working towards. His promise, "We're going to get this, together," echoed in my mind, a mantra I repeated to myself during the long, grueling weeks that followed. I saw us as a team, a united front. I was a fool. I saw a partnership. He saw a resource to be exploited. The work was all-consuming. We lived and breathed market projections, brand strategy, and competitive analysis. Our apartment became a war room, the walls covered in whiteboards filled with my frantic scribbles, the coffee table buried under industry reports. I was in the zone, my mind on fire with ideas. For the first time in months, the unease about Jessica faded into the background, replaced by the sheer adrenaline of the race. I felt like we were back, the old Mark and Chloe, taking on the world together. He was so supportive, so engaged, always telling me how my insights were the key to our victory. "You're the visionary, Chloe," he'd say, looking at me with those wide, earnest eyes. "I'm just the guy who can execute. We're the perfect team." And then, the email landed. It wasn't from our CEO. It was from the organizers of Innovate West, the biggest, most prestigious tech marketing conference on the West Coast. I had submitted a paper months ago on a whim, a deep dive into predictive analytics in consumer behavior. I never expected to hear back. Not only had they accepted it, they weren't offering me a breakout session or a panel discussion. They were inviting me to be the closing keynote speaker. My hands started to shake. The closing keynote. That was the spot reserved for the titans of the industry, the VPs from Google, the celebrity CMOs. It was the kind of career-making opportunity you dream about, but never think will actually happen to you. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was a validation of everything I'd ever worked for, a spotlight that was entirely my own. I pictured myself on that stage, a sea of faces looking up at me, my voice echoing through the massive auditorium. It was a vision of a future I hadn't even dared to imagine. I ran into the living room, waving my phone, my face aching from smiling so hard. Mark, you are not going to believe this." He read the email, and his face broke into a huge grin. He picked me up and spun me around, laughing. "Chloe, oh my God, babe, this is incredible. The closing keynote. That's insane. I'm so proud of you. His excitement felt so genuine, so pure, that my heart swelled. This was my partner, my biggest fan, celebrating my success. He put me down, his hands still on my waist, his expression shifting from pure joy to thoughtful concern. "This is amazing," he said again, more quietly this time. "The only thing is, when is it?" I checked the date. My stomach dropped a little. "It's, the second week of October?" He winced, a barely perceptible motion. "Wow. Okay. So, the director proposal is due that Friday. The conference is in Seattle. You'd have to be there Tuesday through Thursday." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a small circle in our living room. "That's really tight timing. Babe." The bubble of my excitement began to deflate, a slow, sickening hiss of air. "I know, but I can handle it. I can work on the plane. I can pull a few all-nighters." He stopped pacing and took my hands in his. His grip was warm, his expression drenched in sincerity. "I know you can. You're a superhero. But Chloe, think about this. This director role, this isn't just another job. This is for us. This is the down payment on the house in the suburbs. This is the future we've been planning since we were 25. The keynote is an amazing personal achievement, and you deserve it more than anyone. But the director role is our foundation." He squeezed my hands. "I just worry that if you're distracted, trying to perfect your speech, our proposal might suffer, even by 1%. And in a race this tight, 1% is everything." Every word was a perfectly calibrated weapon aimed directly at my loyalty. He wasn't telling me not to go. He was making me feel like choosing myself was a betrayal of us. He was making my ambition the enemy of our future. The vision of me on that stage started to blur, replaced by a vision of Mark, exhausted and alone, trying to carry the weight of our shared dream while I was off chasing personal glory. I pulled my hands away, a knot forming in my throat. "So what are you saying?" He sighed, the sound heavy with manufactured reluctance. "I'm saying it's your call, Chloe. 100%. You're the star. You earned this. And if you want to go, I will support you. I'll try to handle the proposal on my own. I'll work 24/7. I'll sleep at the office if I have to. It's fine. I'll manage. I just want you to be happy." And there it was. The final, brutal checkmate. He had positioned himself as the martyr, the selfless partner willing to sacrifice everything, leaving me with an impossible choice: be the selfish star who abandoned her partner, or be the dedicated partner who sacrificed her own dream for their shared one. I stood there for what felt like an hour, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. The two futures fought a war inside my head. One was bright and loud, filled with applause that was just for me. The other was quiet and steady, the life I was supposed to want, the life we had planned together. He just stood there, watching me, his face a perfect mask of loving concern. My fingers felt like lead as I picked up my laptop. I opened my email. I stared at the invitation, the glowing words a beacon to a life I could have had. I wrote the reply, my heart feeling like a cold, heavy stone in my chest. "Thank you so much for this incredible opportunity. Unfortunately, due to a critical project conflict, I will have to respectfully decline. I hope you'll consider me for future events." I hit send. The sound of the outgoing email felt like a door slamming shut somewhere deep inside me. Mark pulled me into a hug, burying his face in my hair. "I know that was hard," he whispered, "but you made the right choice. For us. I promise you, when we get this promotion, it'll all be worth it. Now, we can really focus. No distractions." His relief was palpable, and in that moment, for the first time, the tiniest, coldest whisper of a thought entered my mind. What if the distraction he wanted to remove wasn't the conference? What if it was me? But I crushed that thought. I buried it deep. It was too ugly, too terrifying to consider. So instead, I did what I always did. I poured another cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and got to work. I channeled all of that lost hope, all of that burning ambition from the keynote stage into that director proposal. I worked with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed. I would make this proposal so brilliant, so undeniable, that my sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. I shared every breakthrough with Mark, every new piece of data, every killer insight, every slide I perfected. He'd watch over my shoulder, taking notes, a look of awe on his face. "That's genius, Chloe. Pure genius," he'd say. He was the perfect supportive partner. He made me feel like we were an unstoppable force. I was pouring the concrete for our foundation. I had no idea I was actually just digging my own grave. I was a ghostwriter for my own downfall. I just didn't know it yet. The night before the proposal was due, we finished. I hit save on the final slide, and a wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over me. 80 slides of data, strategy, and vision. It was perfect. It was bulletproof. It was, I thought, ours. We did it. Mark breathed, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder to look at the screen. "Chloe, it's a masterpiece. It's your masterpiece." "Our masterpiece," I corrected him, leaning back into his embrace. I felt a deep, bone-weary satisfaction. The sacrifice of the keynote, the sleepless nights, the endless stress in that moment. It all felt worth it. We were standing on the precipice of everything we'd ever wanted. "Let's celebrate," he said, his voice bright with excitement. "Let's not even think about work for a few hours. Let's do something fun." He spun me around, a wide, boyish grin on his face. "Let's go house hunting." He didn't mean driving around. He meant opening up Zillow and dreaming. It was our favorite pastime. We'd scroll through listings for sprawling suburban homes with big backyards and wraparound porches, imagining which room would be the nursery, where we'd host Thanksgiving. It was his way of painting a picture of the future my director's salary would help secure. So we did. We sat on the couch, my laptop open, and dreamed. He'd point to a kitchen with a marble island and say, "I can see you making pancakes there on a Sunday morning." It was intoxicating. He was selling me a fantasy, and I was buying every last acre of it. Then, an email pinged. It was from our mortgage broker, a routine follow-up. "Hi, Chloe and Mark. Just need one final document for your pre-approval file, your most recent proof of funds statement. Can you send it over when you have a chance?" "Oh, right," I said. "I think I have that on the shared drive." I stood up, feeling efficient and domestic, a woman on top of her life. Mark stayed on the couch, still scrolling through pictures of houses we would never live in. I went into our home office and opened the shared drive. It was our digital life, neatly organized into folders, vacations, taxes, wedding photos. I typed financials into the search bar. The correct folder appeared, but so did another one, something I'd never seen before. A file name that snagged on my brain. Legacy. What an odd name. Maybe it was some old project of Mark's. Curiosity, that fatal human flaw, got the better of me. My mouse hovered over the folder for a second before I clicked. The inside of the folder was a clean, corporate-looking list of files. My eyes scanned them. The first file I saw made my breath catch. Director proposal, final version. That was my file. But the last modified timestamp was from an hour ago. By Mark. My heart started to beat a little faster. I opened it. It was my work. My 80 slides. But with tiny, cosmetic changes. A different font on a title slide. A graph recolored. And in the document properties, the author name had been changed from Chloe Davis to Mark Peterson. It was professional plagiarism. So subtle I wouldn't have even noticed if I wasn't the one who had bled for every word. Annoyance quickly curdled into a cold, sinking dread. What else was in here? My eyes fell on a subfolder, J&M Comms. My hand was shaking as I clicked. It was a graveyard of our marriage. Screenshots of texts, call logs, email chains between him and Jessica stretching back for months. Can't wait to see you. Last night was amazing. Chloe has no idea. It wasn't just an emotional affair. It was real, physical. The lunches, the strategy dinners, the business trips. A montage of betrayal played out in glowing pixels on my screen. I felt the air leave my lungs in a silent whoosh, as if I'd been punched in the stomach. The room started to feel like it was tilting, the quiet hum of the computer suddenly roaring in my ears, but the worst was yet to come. The final file. It wasn't in a subfolder. It sat there in the main legacy folder, waiting for me. A simple Word document titled Post-Promotion Transition Plan. I clicked it. It wasn't a corporate document. It was a timeline. Their timeline. My blood turned to ice as I read. Phase 1. Q4 secure director role using C's proposal. Leverage her work ethic to ensure flawless execution. Phase 2. Q1 post-bonus payout, consolidate power. Begin delegating C's key responsibilities to J to build J's profile. Phase 3. Q2 initiate, amicable separation from C, citing growing apart due to work pressures. Maintain a positive public image. Phase 4. Q3. Officially promote J to new senior manager role, citing her extraordinary growth. Phase 5. Q4 go public with M and J relationship. Legacy secured. I read it once. Then twice. I couldn't process the words. Legacy? Their legacy? I wasn't a partner. I was a phase. I was a project plan. My entire life. Our entire future. Laid out in 5 corporate, soulless steps. My sacrifice. My ambition. My love. It was all just fuel for their engine. The house on Zillow. The talk of children. The loving embraces. It was all a lie. A meticulously crafted, long con lie. From the other room, I could hear Mark laughing at something on the screen. Hey babe, you should see this place. It's got a pool, he called out, his voice disgustingly cheerful. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my laptop against the wall. I just sat there, bathed in the cold, blue light of my own destruction. The woman who had entered this room 10 minutes ago was gone. She had died a quiet, brutal death, and in her place, something new was taking root. Something cold and sharp and terrifyingly clear. He was humming in the kitchen now, probably making a celebratory drink, dreaming of a future he had built for himself. He had no idea I was in the office, staring at his blueprint and deciding which match to light first. For a long time, I just sat there. I don't know how long. Time seemed to stop. The only sound was the frantic, silent screaming in my own head and the cheerful, oblivious humming of my husband from the kitchen. He was the architect of my ruin, and he was humming a pop song. The sheer, grotesque absurdity of it was what finally broke the spell. A cold clarity washed over me, so sharp and pure it felt like a shard of ice piercing through the fog of my shock. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford. Screaming would only get me fired. My heart was a pile of ash. But my brain was a finely tuned machine, and it had just been given a singular, crystal clear objective. I took a deep, steadying breath. I closed the legacy folder. I cleared my search history. I minimized the browser tab with the real estate listings. Then I stood up on legs that felt strangely steady and walked back into the living room. He looked up from his phone, smiling. Hey, you find it yep? All sent. I lied, my voice sounding unnervingly normal. I sat down next to him, close enough that our legs were touching. I could feel the warmth of his skin. It felt like being next to a lit fuse. Awesome, he said, turning his phone to show me another house. Okay, look at this one. The backyard is insane. Is that a fire pit? I looked at the screen. I saw a beautiful home, a place where a happy family could grow, and I felt nothing. It was like looking at a picture of a foreign country I had no plans to visit. My future had been wiped clean, and the blankness of it was both terrifying and, in a strange way, liberating. I played along for another 20 minutes, making the right noises, commenting on countertops and school districts. It was the greatest performance of my life. Inside, I was a howling vortex of rage and grief. On the outside, I was a supportive wife dreaming about our future. That night, I lay in bed next to him, my body rigid, my eyes wide open in the darkness. He fell asleep within minutes, breathing the deep, untroubled breaths of a man with no conscience. I listened to that sound, the sound that used to bring me comfort, and I felt a hatred so profound it scared me. I didn't sleep. I planned. My mind, which had spent months creating his path to success, was now meticulously, plotting his professional demise. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through our blinds, my tears had dried and my grief had hardened into something cold, dense, and powerful a strategy. I knew I couldn't do it alone. A frontal assault, an emotional accusation of theft and infidelity would be dismissed. I'd be labeled the hysterical, scorned wife. Mark would play the victim, the long-suffering husband of an unstable woman. I needed an ally, a powerful one, and I knew exactly who to go to. Eleanor Vance, the vice president of global strategy. She was a legend at Omnicore, a woman in her late 50s with a razor-sharp mind and a reputation for suffering no fools. She was famous for her brutal efficiency and her uncanny ability to see through corporate nonsense. I had also heard whispers, old office lore from before my time, about how she had once been Mark's boss, years ago, and how he had somehow managed to get promoted out from under her in a way that had always seemed suspicious. It was a long shot, but it was the only one I had. I didn't email her assistant for a meeting. That was too formal, too traceable. I knew she was a creature of habit. 6 a.m. every morning. She was on the treadmill in the corporate gym. At 5:45 I was there, waiting. She stepped onto the machine next to me, giving me a brief, curious nod. We ran in silence for 5 minutes before I spoke, my voice even, my breathing controlled. Eleanor, I need your advice on a strategic problem. She didn't break her stride. I'm listening. I laid it out for her, not as a betrayed wife, but as a concerned executive. I never mentioned the affair. I never mentioned Jessica. I framed it purely as a business threat. I have reason to believe the proposal Mark Peterson is submitting for the director role is fundamentally flawed. I said, it's based on my intellectual property, but more importantly, it contains a significant blind spot that could expose the company to market risk. My concern is that a direct challenge will be perceived as personal conflict rather than strategic counsel. She was silent for a full minute, her eyes fixed on the display in front of her. The only sound was the whir of the treadmills. Finally, she slowed her machine to a walk. She turned to me, her eyes like polished steel. There was no sympathy in them. There was something far better understanding. When I was 30, she said, her voice low and even, a talented young man on my team took one of my ideas and presented it as his own. I went to my boss, furious, with proof. You know what happened. I was told I wasn't a team player. He got a promotion. I got a reputation for being difficult. She took a sip of water. I learned a valuable lesson that day. To beat a man like that, a charming, talented thief, you can't just prove you're better. That's a fight you'll never win. You have to make his entire strategy obsolete. She looked me dead in the eye. Don't come to the board with a better plan. Come to the board with a solution to a problem they don't even know they have yet. A problem that his plan creates. And when you do it, she added, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Make it look like you're helping him. No one respects a messy fight, but everyone respects a brilliant, life-saving solution. And with that, she cranked up her speed and left me behind. It was everything I needed. A key, a blueprint. I left the gym, my mind electric. I spent the rest of the day in a locked conference room with a whiteboard, a gallon of coffee, and a singular focus. I wasn't trying to build a new, better proposal. Eleanor was right. That was the wrong fight. I was deconstructing the one I had already built, the one Mark had stolen. I was looking for the flaw, the single, fatal crack in the foundation that only the original architect would know how to find. And by late afternoon, I found it. A beautiful, catastrophic vulnerability hidden deep in my own data. A risk that, if exploited by a competitor, would turn our projected triumph into an unmitigated disaster. Mark's plan didn't just ignore this risk. His strategy would actively accelerate it. He had stolen a sword, but he had no idea he was pointing it directly at the company's heart. I spent the rest of the evening building my attack. It wasn't a new 80-slide presentation. It was just one slide, the kill shot. Mark came home late, buzzing with confidence from a final prep meeting with Jessica. He found me at the kitchen table, my laptop open. He kissed the top of my head. Still working. Don't worry, babe. The hard part is over. I looked up at him and gave him a small, tired smile. You have no idea. The morning of the presentation, the air in our apartment was thick with a strange, electric tension. It was the frantic, hopeful energy of a game day morning. But for me, it felt like the loaded silence before a verdict is read. Mark was a bundle of confident energy, pacing the living room, rehearsing his opening lines. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal gray one I'd bought him for our anniversary. He looked powerful, charming, the perfect picture of a rising executive. He looked like a complete stranger. How do I look? He asked, adjusting his tie in the hall mirror. Like a director, I said, and the words tasted like ash in my mouth. He beamed, completely missing the toxic irony. He thought it was a compliment. I knew it was a prophecy, just not for him. The boardroom was on the 40th floor, a glass-walled cage overlooking the entire city of Denver. It was designed to intimidate. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the stern, impassive faces of the C-suite executives who were already seated. The CEO, Mr. Henderson, sat at the head, a man whose quiet voice could make or break careers, and across from me, Eleanor Vance, her face giving nothing away. Jessica was there too, sitting in a chair slightly behind Mark, playing the role of the devoted, wide-eyed acolyte. She gave me a small, pitying smile, as if she knew I was about to watch my husband outshine me. The arrogance was breathtaking. I wasn't nervous. The terror and grief of the night before had burned away, leaving behind a core of something hard and cold. I felt a strange, detached calm, like a surgeon before a complex operation. I knew every variable, every possible outcome. I was ready. Mark began, and I had to admit, he was good. He was a performer. He delivered my words, my ideas, with a passion and charisma that was utterly convincing. He spoke of my strategies for market penetration, my analysis of consumer trends, my vision for the brand. He owned it. He stood in front of my soul's work and called it his own, and the board was eating it up. I saw them nodding. Mr. Henderson was smiling. I could feel Jessica's smug energy from across the room. For a terrifying moment, watching him be so brilliant with my own thoughts, I felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe he would win. He ended with a flourish, a grand, sweeping statement about the future of Omnicore, and that, he concluded, is how we don't just compete. That is how we dominate. Polite, appreciative applause filled the room. Mr. Henderson looked genuinely impressed. Thank you, Mark. That was comprehensive. A bold vision. He gathered his papers, ready to conclude. If there are no further questions, this was it. My one shot. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Now. I leaned forward, my hands steady on the table in front of me. "Excuse me, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice clear and calm, cutting through the silence. Every head in the room turned to me. Mark's smile faltered, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "If I may," I continued, looking directly at the CEO. "I have a critical data point that builds directly on Mark's excellent presentation. I believe it's essential for a full risk assessment before we move forward." The room was silent. Using words like risk assessment to a board of directors is like waving a red flag at a bull. Henderson's eyes narrowed with interest. "Go on." "Chloe." I stood up and walked to the front of the room, connecting my laptop. I didn't look at Mark, but I could feel his confused, irritated stare burning into my back. His vibrant 80-slide presentation vanished from the screen, replaced by my one single slide. It was stark black and white. A simple line graph. Next to his colorful, optimistic masterpiece, it looked like an obituary. Mark's proposal for Q4 growth. I began. My voice even is predicated on an aggressive and, on the surface, brilliant push into the European streaming market. His projections, which are right here, show a 20% profit margin. I gestured to his numbers, which were still written on the whiteboard. What his analysis doesn't account for. I continued. Clicking to make my graph appear is the new EU data privacy legislation, GDPR2, which is set to take effect in January. This legislation fundamentally changes how user data can be monetized. I pointed to the graph on the screen. The line started high, then plummeted off a cliff. This data, which my sources provided me this week, shows the projected compliance and fine structure costs of that legislation. As you can see, it will not just erase our projected 20% profit margin, it will actively put this division at a multi-million-dollar net loss within 6 months of launch. A collective, sharp intake of breath sucked the air out of the room. The executives leaned forward, staring at the screen, their faces grim. "His plan," I said, letting the words hang in the air for a moment, inadvertently walks the company directly off a financial cliff. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a career dying. I turned my head slightly and looked at Mark. His face was as white as a sheet. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He was staring at the graph, his mouth slightly open, scrambling for a response that wasn't there. He couldn't defend against it, because it was true, and he had no idea, because he had only stolen the plan. He hadn't done the work. Then, I delivered the final, fatal blow. I turned back to the board, and "I want to sincerely thank Mark," I said, my voice dripping with professional courtesy. His thorough initial work was the foundation that allowed me to cross-reference these new data sets. Without his proposal, I would never have discovered this catastrophic vulnerability until it was too late. I let that sink in. I had just praised him for leading me to the landmine that he himself had stepped on. I had simultaneously exposed his incompetence and painted myself as the vigilant savior, all without raising my voice or making a single personal accusation. Before anyone could speak, I clicked to my final slide. It was titled, "The Solution, the APAC Pivot." "Fortunately," I said, my voice now filled with confidence and energy, "while this door is closing, a much more profitable one is opening." I spent the next 2 minutes outlining a completely new strategy, one that was safer, more innovative, and ultimately more lucrative. When I finished, there was another silence, but this one was different. It was the silence of reassessment, of a power dynamic shifting in real time. The executives were looking back and forth between Mark's pale, horrified face and my calm, composed one. I glanced at Eleanor. She gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on me with a new, profound respect. "Chloe," he said, his voice sharp and decisive, "I think we need to discuss your findings. Immediately." I walked back to my seat, my legs steady, my head held high. Mark was still standing at the front of the room, a statue of his own failure. He had played the game of his life, using my cards, but he'd forgotten one crucial rule. You can't win if you're playing chess against someone who sees the whole board, while you only see your next move. The meeting was adjourned. It didn't end with a bang, but with a quiet, lethal finality. Mark didn't even look at me as he gathered his papers, his hands fumbling, his face a mask of disbelief. He walked out of the boardroom like a man walking to his own execution. Jessica followed him, her head down, refusing to meet my gaze. The power couple of Omnicore had crumbled into dust in the space of 10 minutes. As I packed up my laptop, Eleanor stopped by my chair. She didn't smile, but her eyes held a look of profound, steely approval. "Well done," was all she said. Coming from her, it felt like a coronation. Mr. Henderson shook my hand, his grip firm. "Your office will be ready Monday morning, Director," he said. The title sounded foreign, like a suit that didn't quite fit yet. A week later, I was standing in that office, the corner office, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire city. It was the view Mark had always described, the one he said we'd have one day. But looking out at the sprawling landscape, I didn't feel his ghost. I felt my own future. I had the carpets replaced. I hung new art on the walls. I made it mine. My first act as director wasn't a series of firings or a vindictive reshuffling. That would have been his move. Mine was an email sent to the entire company. The subject line was the Innovation Incubator. I announced a new initiative, a program designed to find and foster brilliant ideas from anywhere in the company, especially from our junior talent. A program to ensure that no voice was ever silenced and no contribution was ever overlooked. It was a promise to every person in that company that Omnicore would be a place where talent, not politics, was the only thing that mattered. 2 months later, I was living in that promise. I was in my office, the late afternoon sun streaming in, deep in a strategy session with a young, brilliant analyst named Maya. She was nervous, but her idea was revolutionary, and I was helping her shape it into a presentation for the board. I saw the same fire in her eyes that I once had in mine, and my job now was to protect that fire, to give it oxygen. There was a soft knock on my open door. Jessica stood there, holding a tray with 2 cups of coffee. She wasn't a strategist anymore. After a quiet, internal investigation, her role had been restructured. She was now in administrative support. She walked in, her movements stiff, and placed the tray on my conference table without making eye contact. The air was thick with the weight of everything unsaid. The woman who had conspired to steal my future was now serving me coffee. "Thank you, Jessica," I said, my voice calm and neutral. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't cruel. It was just final. She gave a tight, clipped nod and turned to leave. As she walked out, Mark was walking past my office, heading towards his new, smaller office down the hall, the one without a view. For a single, cinematic moment, he saw it all. He saw me, in his chair. He saw his ex-wife, serving me, and he saw me leaning forward, smiling, encouraging another bright young woman. He saw his entire world, his entire legacy, not just taken, but replaced with something better. He just stood there for a second, a man completely obsolete in the empire he had tried to build, before walking away. I never spoke to him about it. There was nothing left to say. He had shown me his blueprint for my destruction. In return, I had shown him my blueprint for my success. His was built on deceit. Mine was built on merit. In the end, there was no contest. Sometimes, the greatest favor someone can do for you is to show you exactly how little they value you, because it forces you to finally value yourself. That was the end of his story, but it was the beginning of mine. This channel is for anyone who has ever been forced to build their own throne after being kicked out of the castle. The stories you'll find here are a reminder that your greatest comeback is almost always born from your greatest setback. If this story resonated with you, give this video a like. Let the algorithm know that stories of strength and strategy deserve to be heard. What was the one moment in this story that made you say yes out loud? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe in building your own empire, drop a crown emoji crown down below. Finally, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and turn on all notifications, because your best chapter is still waiting to be written, and we're going to get through it together.